Good evening to everyone. Nice to see you in the sixth seminar of the series on trust and regulation. Today with us, Professor Andrea Renda will give a presentation on trust in digital technologies, from contract tracing applications to policies for trustworthy artificial intelligence. Andrea is a senior research fellow and head of the Global Governance, Regulation, Innovation, and Digital Economy in CEPS, meaning Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels, a think tank, very prestigious think tank, and also I think doing some training as well, academic training or policy. I'm not sure. Maybe Andrea can add on this. And is affiliated with Florence, the EUI, is a non-resident senior fellow at Duke University Kennan Institute for Ethics, visiting professor of competition policy and digital economy in the College of Europe in Bruges, a fellow of the World Academy of Art and Science, CTI fellow of Columbia University Center for Teleinformation. And I can go on and on and on, but I will give him the ability to present his talk and to enlighten us on the relations on trust and digital technologies. Thank you very much, Andrea, for your willingness to present. Please go on.
Thank you very much, David. And it's a pleasure to be with you. And thanks for thinking about me, for giving this seminar. I have admired your work and in all respects in all these years. Even if you and I have met only in a fistful of occasions over the years, I've always seen you as a reference also for the type of work in academic scholarship that I've developed over time. So I'm extremely pleased to be here and to also be able to address students, which are, as always, has been part of my life, since when I was a kid. Basically, I started teaching when I was 21. My first classes in law and economics at the time, economic analysis of law. I'm originally an economist, then trained in law, and then increasingly mingled with technology since many years. I have had the honor to be involved in a number of recent initiatives, including, for example, the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence of the European Commission, and I've had the possibility also of advising the European Commission on the forthcoming AI regulation. So this is a little bit the experience that I want to bring here. If you want to place it more in academic terms, really dancing a little bit in between what we call better regulation or regulatory governance aspects, the problem of adaptive regulation and flexible regulation in the face of ever-changing technologies. And at the same time, the issues related to, in particular, artificial intelligence and the use of emerging technologies in a number of domains. So rather than pretending to cover the whole topic of trust in digital technologies, I would choose a number of examples and maybe try to bring you in a way that will be hopefully as light and entertaining as possible. And to bring you into the mindset of the policymakers that today need to capture a very, very difficult to grasp evolution, such as the emergence of a whole family of new digital technologies, of which artificial intelligence is one, and perhaps one of the most promising and interesting. So what I'll do, I'll share my screen and bring you a little bit into this world, which is the world in which I've been busy lately, and starting with a metaphor or a couple of examples of how I have felt over the past months in dealing with the regulation of emerging technologies, in particular artificial intelligence, but also dealing and assisting policymakers in trying to grasp with rules which are solid, are principles-based, and at the same time are flexible enough to really accompany the evolution, the breathtaking pace of evolution of these technologies. So for me, the real metaphor to start from is the starry sky, because compared to what we have traditionally called evidence-based policymaking, where we study, for example, ex-ante impact assessment of new legislation, the analysis of a problem, the identification of potential alternative policy options to solve that problem, which is typically retrospective. When it comes to artificial intelligence, when it comes to digital technologies, there is an element of evidence-based policymaking in the art of policymaking, if you wish, in the art of regulation, or in the craft of regulation, if you wish. And but at the same time, there needs to be an element of foresight. So the starry sky for me is a good metaphor, because first of all, I've always loved it since when I was a kid, but also what we see when we stare at the starry sky is an impossible, or is a fake image, if you wish. It's a collection of objects that are located in different parts of the universe, different distances from our eyes, and the extent to which we see the size of these objects is only a function of their distance. But what we see, obviously, since light takes time to bring the image to our attention, is not the image of the starry sky as it is in reality, right? It is a collection of images that were brought to us by the light through the universe and the empty space of the universe, or the almost empty space of the universe out there. And similarly, when you look at artificial intelligence today and try to craft rules for artificial intelligence today, you don't have to think about artificial intelligence as we're using it now, or the techniques that seem to be the most promising, or the ones that are subject to the highest level of investment or deployment commercially today. But you also have to look in the labs, you have to look into research and development, and so exercise a little bit of foresight to understand where will digital technology, and in particular artificial intelligence, be by the time our rules hit the market, and hopefully a bit going forward as well. Because when we craft rules, these rules have to be made to last at least a few years, and to be relevant for at least a few years. Otherwise, the risk is that by the time we enact legislation, these rules will be either already obsolete or close to being obsolete. So I will try to use this metaphor throughout this class to just really get everybody on the same page. I take it that some of the students take regulation of digital technologies, others might be studying slightly different topics. So I hope that by doing this, we bring everybody on the same page, and we can all follow the seminar in the same way. So the first thing that I want to convey here is there is a need for a degree of foresight. And we see this, for example, in a number of governments today, where the better regulation agenda is being accompanied also by a degree of horizon scanning for new technologies, but also what we call foresight in and of itself. A good example is the European Commission, where under Ursula von der Leyen, the new responsible for better regulation is Vice President Šefčovič, who now is also responsible for dealing with the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and in particular dealing with foresight. So there has been already an attempt to match and merge these two disciplines, if you wish, in a way that should enable more future-proof legislation in the future. And to some extent, this is also going back to something that I studied when I was a kid, really, at school, when I was studying philosophy. You know that we Italians study a lot of ancient philosophy, especially when we take the classical studies track in high school. And I remember the fantastic elaborations of Zeno from Elea, who was a pre-Socratic, and who used to conceptualize the so-called paradox of motion, right? Imagining Achilles that would chase a tortoise, but would only jump where the tortoise would actually be at that same moment. So Achilles being in A1 and the tortoise being in T1 in this image, Achilles would decide to jump on A2. But by the time Achilles reaches that point, the tortoise will have made an additional step, right? And it will be already in T2. And then Achilles, who's in A2, will try to jump on A3, but by that time, the tortoise will be in T3, and so on and so forth. So mathematically, we normally say that asymptotically, the Achilles will never reach the tortoise, right? As a tendency in this paradox of motion, despite the fact of being faster, Achilles will never manage to reach the tortoise. And that's the same image, meaning if we craft our legal rules in a way that takes as reference where the market is now, we'll probably miss constantly, and we will be sort of constantly obsolete, because by the time those rules are enacted and implemented in the market, they will not be really reflecting where technology has been. This is becoming even more complicated because the situation that we see today is the situation of the law, which is very slow typically, and at the EU level where I typically work, not only at the EU level, but I have devoted most of my efforts, in particular on the side of artificial intelligence lately, the law, and be that in the form of a regulation, as we will see later, will be the type of instrument chosen by the European Commission for AI, or even more, a directive which requires transposition at the national level, and then implementation and the setting up of governance structure and an enforcement mechanisms. The law is very slow, right? So it's indeed a situation in which the paradox of motion sees a tortoise trying to chase a much faster set of technologies which evolve, again, a breathtaking speed. And so this requires perhaps a change in the way in which we approach legislation, in which we approach regulation. And this is something that, depending on the type of policy forum or context that you take as reference, has been defined as either adaptive regulation or planned adaptive regulation, or in some cases anticipatory regulation, if you wish to take the jargon used, for example, by Nesta, the Foundation for Innovation at the UK level, or in other cases, more generally agile or flexible regulation. So this is basically the issue that I want to bring in as a first element of this class. How do we become more agile? And also, how do we trust that the rules that are in place and the enforcement and governance mechanisms that we're put in place are such that we can trust the overall system that accompanies technological evolution, and thereby also the products and services that get to us as consumers or as professional users. This is something that, in this sort of light introduction that I've imagined for this class, is something that I've tried to grasp and capture in several ways over time. And one example of a way in which I've tried to do this is by using narrative. And so a couple of years ago, I had an inspiration to write a story to think about trust in technology. And I thought I was very smart in writing that story. So I went to, it's, as you will see in the end, I was not that smart probably, but I want to expose that to you, just to show how sometimes academics try to convey to policymakers complex messages by portraying a situation in the maybe not so distant future and explaining what problems might emerge over time. So in this case, I had started writing a story about a guy that I had called Ben, or Benjamin, if you want. And Ben is a guy that at some point discovers, unfortunately, that he is terminally ill, and he only has 6 months left to live. And the doctor tells him, and by the time the doctor tells him, for some reason, the data leak, and a company that is specialized in a number of services, we are around 2025, if you wish. So 5 years down the road, contacts Ben and asks Ben whether he would be willing to enter a deal in which, for free, Ben would share all the data that he has disseminated on social networks over the years. There's an interesting feature in GDPR where you can actually have the data downloaded in a compatible and portable format. So if Ben could use that possibility to retrieve all the data and convey and transfer them to this company, the company would store them and manage them for free. And if Ben has diaries or memories that he has written over time, or other documents, maybe he was an academic, so he's been writing things. That is also very welcome to convey to the company. And if Ben can also enter a 3-day interview with his company where he shares his ideas, for example, on his political thoughts and preferences, on his commercial preferences on a number of products, I don't know, eau de parfums or records or movies. And if Ben could also indicate who his best friends are and who his relatives and his broader family is, that would also be extremely welcome. Maybe also the relatives, maybe Ben's wife and maybe his kids will be interviewed by the company, always for free. And within 6 months, unfortunately, when Ben will pass away, the company will create a perfect replica of Ben, a virtual replica of Ben, which will continue to evolve and will continue to age, just as Ben might have, based on an amount of data that are fed to an algorithm, which will calculate in a probabilistic way how a person of the age and resemblance of Ben might potentially age. And the algorithm would also then determine whether Ben, for example, over time might change his political preferences. Since this will be an ongoing, a learning-based system, the system might be able to scrape data, for example, from social media or from the news. And this also means that the replica of Ben over time might be able to formulate political preferences in the upcoming elections, despite the fact that Ben is already passed away. And Ben might also be able to recommend what to vote for or who to vote for to his wife, to his kids. They probably would prefer interacting with the replica of Ben, or just to instill an element of ongoing developments in the market, what we would call a grief bot of Ben. This is the term that we are using today. And rather than going, I don't know, to Google's homepage or asking Alexa, right? Because at least they can see a person that they really miss, and they would be able to somehow continue to interact with the person by seeing the person change. Ben at some point would be able also to tell maybe his daughter that he's extremely happy that one of her friends has just had a baby, and he would be able to congratulate even directly the friend for the fact that the friend of his daughter has just had a baby. And maybe because the images and the news has been posted on Facebook, and this is something that could be easily retrieved by going through the personal contacts of Ben and his family, right? I think that was a very promising story, and also because at some point the doubt emerges as to whether Ben is indeed a person that is being managed by, for example, a deep learning algorithm with the use of a technique called generative adversarial network that can replicate the voice and the appearance of Ben, and at the same time, a deep learning algorithm that would determine in an ongoing, in a learning-based way, how Ben would evolve over time and the type of information that we'll be able to manage. But the doubt will remain whether someone is actually telling the replica of Ben whether it would be better to promote a specific political party or a specific brand or a specific product, to continue nudging his family and maybe an extended family to, for example, vote for a certain party or take specific commercial decisions and so on and so forth. So indeed, Ben, the replica of Ben will become an interlocutor which would unleash important data flows with other individuals, potentially interacting with other AI systems and other grief bots over time. We don't know exactly where this is going to lead in terms of the evolution of Ben's attitude. As we saw, for example, 4 years ago, a chatbot developed by Microsoft called TiGRE that hit the Twitter sphere already in 2016, really capturing information from the Twitter sphere and becoming very quickly fascist and racist, and having to be withdrawn by Microsoft very swiftly, just because the chatbot called TiGRE was really assimilating and elaborating all the information, including sometimes this very undesirable information, and sometimes even non-man-made information, such as the Twitter bots that produce and amplify information which is sometimes not very reliable, right? So we don't know exactly what will happen when Ben starts interacting with the real world. We don't know exactly what happens when the replica of Ben interacts with other grief bots and human beings. Anything can happen. If the company that is initially created the replica of Ben keeps Ben under control, Ben might emerge as a very trustworthy and reliable person, but at the same time, no one will ever get to know unless they inspect the algorithm used by that company, whether Ben is being inspired by strong commercial powers or strong political powers, for example. So I thought this would be a very promising story, as I was saying, and I was feeling quite smart. I thought the policymakers would grasp it, and then I realized that Black Mirror, a famous TV series, had already imagined something like this. So in fiction, at least, these already existed. This is an episode called Be Right Back. But then I discovered that also in reality, something like this was happening. Already 5 years ago, when the famous Russian influencer Roman Mazurenko passed away, his girlfriend transformed his let's say his soul, if you wish, or his personality into a grief bot, to which took at the time only based on available technology the appearance of a chatbot. So it's purely a chat line where the person that responds or the system that responds try to respond by mirroring the type of opinions and behavior that Roman Mazurenko had displayed by disseminating tons of data on social media over time. Now that so far still is something that I think we could potentially manage because we are talking about chatbots. We potentially could be enabled perhaps by legislation or perhaps by corporate social responsibility at the very beginning to understand and collect information as to whether this system is powered by an artificial intelligence system or whether there's a human on the other side. So the first thing that we would need in order to understand whether we can trust somehow what we're being told and what's the process that brings information to us. It's a system that is exactly what is not happening at the moment on the internet and in the digital ecosystem more generally. Ironically, in the current situation on the internet, we are very often asked to demonstrate ourselves that we are not robots. But robots don't have to do that with us, right? So the CAPTCHA that we normally have to take to demonstrate that we are not a robot, and everybody does it regularly on the internet, has no counter CAPTCHA. And this is already something that will probably have to be fixed over time. And the legislation, but also the ethical principles in artificial intelligence that are being prepared by several international fora, but also private corporations or organizations around the world, normally include this responsibility, and in the case of the EU, potentially a regulatory obligation to inform duly end users whenever they're interacting with a non-mediated artificial intelligence system that acts as a human as an interface with human users. Now, so far so good, I was saying, relatively manageable. But this year already, pre-COVID, we discovered a first rather disquieting piece of evidence of how technology has been developing in a way that might confuse us a lot more as to the data intensive, the data rich environment that surrounds us. In January this year, a South Korean broadcaster released a documentary of a mother celebrating the 7th birthday of her daughter in virtual reality, despite the fact that her daughter had unfortunately passed away 3 years before. This is a documentary that is, for those that are easily get emotional, is not recommended. And for me, it was also hard to consult. I did it for professional reasons. And you see in that documentary, the mother being extremely confused, interacting with the daughter that is looking exactly like her daughter, with only one change, which is the daughter has aged from the age 4 to age 7 in a very credible way. And the mother doesn't know whether to laugh, whether to cry, because she is completely confused by what she's seeing. Now imagine, and I already tried to put some some figures in there. We're going to get back to this in the next few minutes. But Imagine that today we live in a world in which we have a lot of information that is largely being produced by end users so far in an internet which is not heavily relying on connected things, if not our smartphones and maybe wearables such as the Fitbits or the Apple Watches and a few other things that are actually connected and constantly producing or receiving information. In 15 years from now, this comes from a study that I did recently for the European Parliament on the world in 2035. And I was asking around also to corporations and industry experts to give me their own estimate for the amount of connected devices and objects in 2035. We have today between 6 and 8 billion connected devices. In 2035, the expectation is to have to be somewhere close, ballpark figure, to 1 trillion connected devices. So imagine a world in which 1 trillion connected devices exchange information, produce information, and convey information to us in a way that, if you wish, represents a fifth element for us. We are immersed in an extremely data-rich environment in which what we receive is something that is not necessarily something we feel we can trust, because we don't know whether it's real or it's fake. And we start seeing cases in which the same techniques that was used to age the daughter from age 4 to age 7 is being used to produce the so-called deep fakes, where we have images of famous personalities and public figures, but also private figures, potentially being replicated in a way that is increasingly difficult to makes it increasingly difficult to understand the difference, right? So one of these images of Vladimir Putin that you see is fake, and the other one is real. But then you need to let me know maybe by the end of the class which one you think was fake and which one was real. And as you can see, even more in the pandemic world, when most of the information we consume it via the internet, something that was considered to be an emerging problem, deepfakes, also for the stability of our democracies, also for the potential risk of manipulation of public information by hostile cyber attacks, is now becoming a pure issue of emergency, not just a problem, because the amount of interaction with the internet has inevitably increased. And most of our access to the world, especially in periods of prolonged lockdowns, are happening through the internet. So here's a first example of how technology is basically overtaking us increasingly, creating potentially not really an issue, well, a first issue of data flows, but an immediately a subsequent issue of trust. How can we trust what we see if there's no mechanism in place for us to fully have confidence that the process behind that is observable, has been observed not necessarily by us, but by somebody? In all these months of discussions on how to make AI trustworthy, I've listened to many experts and academics and industry experts and policymakers that were telling me, well, we normally don't need to observe technology ourselves or being experts ourselves in inspecting, for example, technologies. But when we use a washing machine, for example, or when we use a car, we place our confidence in the process behind, in the fact that there are standards, that there are conformity assessment procedures that have been testing the robustness and reliability and resilience of those products when put to use. And so we actually place our trust in the expert systems that are being deployed in order to guarantee the quality and the robustness of the systems. So can we do the same with AI? We will see this in the next few minutes, that this is indeed the instinctive reaction of policymakers such as the European Commission to deploy conformity assessment for an AI system. But obviously we will find some problems on the way. Now, the fact that what we see is not necessarily what is real is also testified by other examples that I want to bring to your attention. Last year, for the first time, Amazon in the United States started launching the so-called checkout free stores. It's these stores where if you have an Amazon account, you can get in, you can pick the products that you want, you exit the store without seeing anybody, talking to anybody, interacting with any counter, cashier, or automated payment system. You just exit the store and you will have paid exactly the products that you have picked, which is a promise of artificial intelligence, if you wish, because it requires a degree of hardware, obviously, cameras that observe the behavior of anyone who's in the store. And it requires the ability to recognize images, so visual recognition, the processing that images, understanding what has happened, and attributing products to the Amazon accounts of the people that have visited the store. Obviously, there's a problem of localizing people, tracking what people do, and potentially storing in a secure way that information. But this is not what I wanted to signify here. In my friends from the Berkeley AI Research Group, Bayer, in particular Mark Nitzberg and his colleagues, have concluded recently a research on checkout-free stores and discovered that those checkout-free stores still have a pretty large amount of hidden labor, sort of reliance on hidden labor, meaning that they discovered that there's dozens of people in Madagascar that manually observe what the cameras bring to the attention of the AI system and correct the AI system whenever, and apparently this happens quite often, the AI system gets it wrong. Now, this can happen all the time. I mean, when I go to the supermarket with my 8-year-old son, sometimes he picks, I don't know, his favorite box of cereals because there's, I don't know, a monster or superhero inside that he would like to have. And then I realize that he's never going to eat the cereals. And then I ask him to put them back. Is the AI system going to recognize this? Or I'm not particularly tall, so in some cases I might have a problem in reaching out to the top shelf. If I ask somebody else to pick the product for me, is this person going to pay on my behalf or not? Is the artificial intelligence system going to grasp this situation and correctly interpret it? What we know from artificial intelligence systems today is that they are increasingly accurate at deciphering static images. They are still quite bad at detecting movement, as we see from the experience in self-driving cars in particular, and they obviously don't grasp the context. So any posture or gesture that resembles some other gesture might be easily confused by an AI system. So the irony of all this is, first of all, that behind the AI, there's a lot of hidden labor, but from the irony to a more, if you wish, to more sarcasm or even tragedy in some cases, is that these people that you see in the picture have no economic security in their jobs, because what they are actually doing is they are training a system that one day will become more accurate and will finally be able to replace them. You've seen that in the United States, where algorithms are more widespread and perhaps unleashed with less regulatory constraints already now. The situation of platform work and the situation of hidden labor more generally. In the pandemic, we've seen the number of people on unemployment subsidies in the United States skyrocket from 300,000 to 30 million only in 3 weeks. Obviously, this number has gone down, and the flexibility of the labor market has proven its worth to some extent. But at the same time, if you consider the issue of sustainability, if you consider the issue of being employed and economic security as being a key element, also empirically, of a subjective well-being, this is not necessarily a situation which we could consider to be ideal in the way in which we incorporate the technological element in our society today. And obviously, when you have a flow of information that is not necessarily controlled, and these are the first 25 years of the internet, if you wish, information flows, it's easily replicated, it really exits our sphere of control very easily, and it enters a huge secondary market for information. You cannot stop, for example, information from being used by governments to deploy extremely efficient forms, but extremely, in some cases, intrusive forms of user profiling and social credit scoring, as my fourth example in this slide. And this is not just a problem in China. where the social credit scoring system has now become a sort of a federal, as a pan-Chinese reality from the 1st of January of this year, after extensive experimentation at the provincial level. But also it's a problem that has emerged, maybe with narrower scope in countries like the Netherlands or Denmark recently, with the use of algorithms that end up being not only intrusive of privacy, but inherently discriminatory, also especially when put in the hands of government. So how can we trust that information that flows out of our personal sphere is correctly managed and it doesn't flow into the wrong hands or used into used for purposes that are potentially violating fundamental rights? How can we also trust the inflow of information from an increasingly information-rich and data-rich environment? That is one of the key topics of today, and one of the key problems, especially when I sit in conferences everywhere around the world, or now from the same desk, but connected with every place around the world, and people keep saying the data is the new oil. Now, I wanted to take a minute to discuss this statement, because I'm sometimes deeply irritated by this statement. First of all, because I happen to have a Venezuelan wife, and so I know very well that oil is not always a blessing for a country, right? And there's obviously a lot of academic literature as well on the curse of natural resources for countries that mismanage those natural resources, don't diversify their economy, they remain extremely dependent on those resources, and they are somehow enslaved internally, when you look at the citizens, by those that manage to centralize management of those resources. So if you wish, you could say data is the new oil today, but not exactly in the same sense in which people mean it when they pronounce the statement. It might be the new oil in the sense that it might end up in the hands of a few people and might be used or abused to the detriment of the individual citizens. So what we see in, I don't know, Bolivia, for example, when you see people lining up to buy gas in the stores, despite the fact that they are sitting on the largest gas resources in the world, or what you see in Venezuela, where people really have to line up for shampoo or soap while the country has the largest known oil resources in the world, is exactly what you see today in the United States, when you see farmers having to purchase access to their data from Monsanto or John Deere or IBM, because these companies are now centralizing and storing in the cloud data that are extracted from the same fields that farmers own. So farmers actually have to become slave in their own land because of the data-intensive nature of modern precision agriculture. So for me, I already would question the reference to oil, but I actually would also question the reference to data as being the new, let's say, resource or precious resource of the future, because I don't think the issue today is really in the data itself. Meaning the flows of data will skyrocket, and the data economy is poised to increase fivefold in the next 5 years. And certainly many experts say that the amount of data available for machine learning in particular doubles every year, so increases exponentially. But what we see in practice is that the new challenge that we have is how to actually trust the data. So if there's a new oil or a new precious resource, and you see this in the attempt of some of the large digital platforms to capture the attention and the trust of their end users, but also increasingly in the attempt of policymakers to build principles for trustworthy technology, the real El Dorado of the future, if you wish, is not data, but rather trust. And this also means that in the future, if we want to build a trusted environment in the digital society, we might not necessarily always rely on a principle that has been a basic tenet of the internet economy in its first 25 years of commercial existence, if you wish, which is open data and free flow of information. But we might have a more nuanced and if you wish, a more sophisticated approach to the management and the evolution and the flows of data, where certain data actually maximize their value when they are kept in private hands or potentially in the hands of the end users when it comes to personal data. Some data flows are best contributing to the economy and society if they remain managed, but within a relatively select cohort, and other data should flow freely and should be also observable freely, in particular by citizens, especially where they are when they are in the hands of government. What does this mean for policymaking? We'll see this in a few seconds. I want to sort of take stock a little bit as to what are the key principles that we need to put in place in policymaking to ensure that we move from the data flows at all costs principle into the trust at all costs principle as an element that would bring the digital economy to the next level. We've seen that in contact tracing apps, right? We've seen a relatively paradoxical situation in comparing the possible models that have been proposed for contact tracing apps. I will not elaborate in full depth because this would require a webinar by itself. I mean, what we've seen over time, but basically we've seen the comparison and the ongoing discussion as referred to two basic governance models, if you wish, and data governance models for contact tracing apps. One is a model in which contact tracing apps produce data on who has been within, in particular, Bluetooth proximity of specific end users and store this data centrally for national health authorities to potentially have access to this data and then perform a much more effective tracking and tracing activity. And this is something that was mostly advocated by many governments, especially in Europe, in recognition of the fact that due to the pandemic, the interest of and the goal of protecting public health was somehow trumping temporarily the safeguards that are normally included in our general data protection regulation. And it is indeed, I say this, framed it rather incorrectly, I would say, also because the GDPR already contemplates the possibility that emergency situation leads to derogating some of the principles that are otherwise non-negotiable in GDPR and in data protection, as particular at the EU level. So that model, the centralized model, has been aggressively resisted and criticized by not only researchers, but also unbelievably large technology corporations, which are typically demonized for the fact that they abuse user data or they resell and reuse user data without a lot of controls. So we have experienced a situation in which we've had a trust game, if you wish. Governments were telling end users, please centralize the data storage and please accept the centralized model so that we can follow in a more effective way the information that is produced by your phones, especially when one of the users that has an app installed tests positive for COVID-19. We need that to be more effective in contact tracing. And the tech giants, which in particular Apple and Google, which were saying, we defend the decentralized model against governments because we would like to protect the privacy for end users. So we will keep the information purely stored on phones, and the system will work automatically by sending messages to all the other end users that have been within reach, within Bluetooth reach for a reasonable amount of time of someone who's then tested positive for COVID-19. To me, this is also not only a trust game, but it also tells us and teaches us some lessons for on one specific issue that relates to technology. Technology, even when it's very powerful, think about decentralized systems, is nothing without adequate governance. If you have a purely decentralized system where your phone one day tells you that you have been in touch or somehow within reach of someone who is recently tested positive, and you don't know because of privacy protection, who, when, how, for how long, And you cannot use that information, for example, for justifying your absence from work, or you cannot use this information to obtain a fast track lane in a hospital to be tested immediately. And this information cannot be used further by healthcare authorities to try and chase the ones that potentially should be tested as fast as possible to avoid the spread of the contagion. That very powerful technological solution is going to remain completely useless. And this is what we've seen in most countries in the past months. Simply the decentralized model is perhaps more privacy preserving, but potentially useless unless governments build a full governance around it. And the centralized model is potentially intrusive and creates a lack of trust in governments that promise temporary storage of data in a way that most end users and citizens will never be able to verify, right? So just to give you an example. So how do we go from here to a trusted situation? I think governments will need, and here I go into the second part of my presentation, governments will need a number of principles and a number of approaches in regulation that are particularly important. So I'll try to list them very quickly and to see whether we can build something around this. So the first principle is foresight. Again, the starry sky, again, Achilles and the tortoise. The European Commission has recently exercised this level of foresight when Commissioner Thierry Breton started saying, we want to craft rules and develop a strategy for the European Union, which is not based on the current model when we store most of our data on the cloud, but on the model that will be there in 5 years from now. And the expectation of many experts is that in 5 years from now, technology will enable us to store our data much more on our devices. And the need to deploy artificial intelligence that is coupled with the Internet of Things, for example, in self-driving cars or in agriculture, will force us to store intelligence and data much closer to where action needs to take place. So, for example, a self-driving car that needs to take a decision in real time because it is immersed in traffic cannot in most cases have the possibility of shipping the information to the cloud, have the information being elaborated by the AI system in the cloud, and then receiving back that information to then take a decision. This will create a delay, or what we call latency, technically speaking, that is in some cases not possible to allow because it might create danger and risk. We need to have the intelligence much closer, or if possible, in the car, so that the information, typically in the form of small data rather than big data, can be translated into meaningful action. Now, as technology allows, I mean, technology today only allows perhaps a duration of a battery of 20 to 30 minutes if we want to pull a full-fledged AI system into the car. But we can have AI systems close to where action needs to take place, for example, in the intermediate layer between the device and the cloud, which we call the edge layer, and their AI systems will be stored and will be able to more promptly take decisions and process and elaborate information. Now, in this system, which is what I normally call a peripheral nervous system, in a metaphor with human anatomy, we are now distributing intelligence much more because technology allows us to do so. But in a situation like this, the future data storage in artificial intelligence might not be in the hands of a few companies, which are the cloud, the 5 big companies, 4 of which are American and 1 of which is Chinese, Alibaba, that dominates the cloud-based environment and centralize the elaboration and processing of information. So what we see is the addition to this environment, which is a digital ecosystem, of a new layer, which is the edge layer, where there's no obvious dominant company, and where the EU, also thanks to its industrial companies, might want to try and conquer spaces. Now, this is going to be very complicated if there's no governance around this, as I was saying before. So let's see what the European Commission has come up with in this respect. So we see a second data wave.
Andrea?
Yeah.
Andrea?
Yes, I hear.
How long do you have to go?
Approximately 10 minutes. Is it fine? Is 10
Yes,
minutes?
but then we have only 10 minutes of discussion, but this is fine because it's fascinating. We'll digest what you have to go and finish in 10 minutes.
I'll finish in 10 minutes, so it
That's
means
fine.
that we're going to have to be a bit quick on some aspects, but I should be able to make it. Okay, so understanding where technology is going enables a new strategy on the regulatory side, where the European Commission still wants to set the rules for ethically aligned AI. Is still trying to rebalance competition to invert the tendency and the centripetal forces that have accumulated data in the hands of a few players, but still wants to try and compete also, as you will see, by developing data governance rules to give the possibility of the real economy players and the end users to exercise their bargaining power and the possibility to negotiate on access to data with interlocutors such as the large tech giants. So the embedded AI becomes a new frontier, and also specialize in something that has not developed so far, but is the use of technology and the governance of and by technology in government, which is a new frontier that requires, again, very clear rules on ensuring trust in data. So foresight is the first element. The second is regulation becomes principles-based. And there's, as a good example of principles for trustworthy technology is the experience that I've had in the high-level expert group on AI. We probably have followed this if you study digital technology. What I did with other colleagues is to develop 4 key principles of trustworthy AI: the respect for human autonomy, the need to prevent harm, the fairness of AI processes and outcomes, and the explicability of AI with different, extents and modes of modes of implementation depending on the use case. We have also done something different compared to the dozens and dozens of ethical principles that exist already at the international level for artificial intelligence. We've converted these principles into 7 requirements, which will be the basis of the forthcoming regulation, which will see the light perhaps in February next year. And we have also translated those 7 principles into an assessment list, which is now published in open source format online. We published this in June, which accompanies anyone who develops AI through a series of questions on whether good practices on ensuring respect with the 7 requirements are being followed. It's a first attempt to try and steer the development of technology, which still lacks a governance and an enforcement, obviously. Maybe in the regulation we will see, and I want to cover that to the extent possible, although very briefly, towards the end of my 10 minutes, on how this is taking shape, if you wish, in the aisles and the corridors of the European Commission. So principles-based, but also outcome-based regulation, meaning we need to know where we want technology to lead us. We should not take technology as an end, but rather as a means. So as an example, to do it very quickly, the European Commission asked me several times the question, how can we become more competitive in AI? My answer is, I don't care about AI. If I hear that AI can help me and help our societies achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, I'm happy to have AI in place. If we can achieve them without AI, I'm equally happy. But obviously, if you take as a goal, as a North Star of policy making, achievement of goal 8, for example, decent work and economic growth, or its sub-indicators on full and decent employment for everybody, then you probably give a different answer to your question on how and when do we deploy AI, for example, in factories, compared to the case in which you think you want to be a leader in AI around the world. So the 2 different goals and outcomes in mind dictate different actions in public policy. And I think we need to make sure that we consider technology as a means and not an end. We also have to be risk-based, and that is also another element which is going to be very complicated, because One thing is using AI or certain types of AI to, for example, reduce the energy consumption of a data center. Another thing is to use AI to decide who's going to get the next kidney in an organ donation. And this is happening already in reality, that algorithms match donors and beneficiaries. And we need to be sure that we trust the process that they follow. We need to be agile in the sense that we need governance structures that are not just testing AI through conformity assessment ex ante and or set rules ex ante and then demand to maybe courts to decide what is proper and what is due process or what is compliance with legislation. We need to make sure that we have institutions that can constantly update their knowledge and update the knowledge of the market as to how technology is developing. And we obviously need also shared values. So we do this in Europe, we do this in Israel. We might be easily outcompeted by players that do not follow the same trustworthy AI principles or do not follow the same trustworthy AI governance and enforcement mechanisms. So we might end up, as things currently stand, with a global partnership on artificial intelligence as we see developing in the G20 framework. But we might also see, and the Trump administration is being very vocal on this, attempts to have more restricted circles of so-called trust networks, incorrectly termed worldwide networks, or even more dystopian scenarios, which we see as still probable or likely, at least, if we continue on with this trend, which are scenarios of fragmentation of internet protocols and practices in what we call sometimes, in a very dystopian way, the splinternet scenario. So how do we wrap up this graphically? 25 years ago, when the internet was born and the World Wide Web, meaning started permeated our lives. I mean, the internet obviously predates the early 90s, but the World Wide Web, so the internet for us end users, emerges in the early 90s. Telecoms experts, computer scientists used to portray the internet in this way. You can imagine this as a Big Bang picture. An infrastructure layer, largely the telecoms networks, a logical layer with traffic rules that are largely relying on open standards, applications layers with anyone could engage in so-called permissionless innovation. Since the standards were open, anyone could develop an app and place it on the open internet. Content that would be largely governed by the applications and would be inputted into the internet ecosystem by end users. 25 years down the road, the starry sky is what we see in this slide. We have largely the same structure for the internet, but the open internet is now flanked by a number of cloud-based platforms that really centralize most of the value and most of the data storage and also most of the possibility to invest in data-hungry forms of artificial intelligence, such as machine learning and its subvariants. How do we have to change the structure of the internet, and how, in particular, the EU, in my interpretation, is trying to change the structure of the internet to avoid that these centripetal forces continue to feed only a fistful of players. I will skip a couple of slides here. Oh, no, I'll go into this slide and then I will go towards to the end immediately by skipping a couple of additional slides that I had. So sorry for that. So the new architecture of the internet as we see it in the next few years is slightly more complicated than the ones that I showed you from 25 years ago or from the starry sky as we see it today. So what's coming, at least in the mind of many regulators around the world, is more diverse forms of connectivity, where we have 4G, 5G, but also low power connectivities that will increasingly have to be pervasive and will change depending on the use case. For example, in agriculture, we will not necessarily have 5G, but we might have LoRa, say low power area networks and other forms of low power connectivity modes. We will have technical protocols that embed compliance with legislation and try to create a more fragmented or pluralistic, let's say, market structure, in particular by embedding interoperability obligations for those players that have accumulated much more data than the others And this is potentially the scaling up of the Gaia X initiative. We will have a blossoming Internet of Things and edge layer, as I was saying before. We will need, in order to restore or establish trust in this traditionally unregulated environment, to embed layers that come with digital identity, authentication, and verification, but also with elements of legal and semantic interoperability. For those of you that have followed the literature since the early 90s, Larry Lessig used to say already in the mid-90s that on the internet, it's rather code than law that determines what's possible. Well, this generation that is coming is a generation in which certainly EU institutions will try to embed legal codes into software codes, and Gaia X and what we'll see now, the data spaces are the typical poster child of this generation. So on top of this, we will see a number of environments in which data are not fully open, but are rather managed for specific purposes. Three are cross-cutting. This is the data strategy that the European Commission presented in February on skills, on the Green Deal, on public administration. And then we will see a top layer which has not only the open internet as 25 years ago, you would say, but has a number of sectoral data spaces for automotive, for manufacturing, for agriculture, for finance, for energy, and so on and so forth, within which real economy players coordinate and manage jointly the data to then negotiate with cloud-based operators. So we have managed data, not open data. We will have the traditional open internet. We will have the already emerged digital platforms, but we'll also increasingly have dedicated spaces for digital government. So the future internet is specialized, is not a clean slate, open-ended as the initial internet has been. At least this is the way I see it. And within this, we will have pervasive developments. One is certainly artificial intelligence, which is not a layer, but it's a new way of doing things that powers most of these layers. And we will have the need to establish trust in the flows of personal data, in particular by choosing emerging protocols for enabling user control over personal data. I'll skip the other slides that I have here, like on enhanced coordination of data, which is one of my favorite, and go directly towards the end, okay? Sorry for this. There were more than a couple of slides, actually, that I have prepared for you. I'll go towards the end, and if there are questions on the forthcoming regulation in AI and my doubts about it, I'm happy to take them and maybe show the slides that I haven't shown. What do we need to establish trust? To wrap up, we need two things, in my opinion. There are key elements. One is the ability to project the evolution of technology in the future. So the starry sky, if you wish. We also need the ability to relate the future regulatory framework to our basic principles and to embed those principles and values and legal rules into software code and technical code in order to be able to establish a process that all stakeholders and users will be able to trust. So to sum up, I go back to Immanuel Kant, the critique of practical reason, when he says that the two things that fill the mind with new and increasing admiration and awe are the starry heavens above us and the moral law within us. So these are the two elements that I think are the most difficult to preserve in the future regulatory framework. And I think this will also preserve us two elements that are key in our coexistence with machines in the future. The first is the ability to distinguish reality from its representation. Now think about deepfakes or my story of Ben. And the second is to preserve the uniqueness of our own interpretation of what is the external environment and our interpretation of the way in which we relate to the external environment, which is our own personal vision of the starry sky. So I'll stop there. And sorry for not being able to show some of the slides. Happy to take your questions and hopefully have to raise some curiosity as to what's coming next. So stop sharing and see, hopefully we have time to take a few questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrea. It was fascinating. It's pity that we didn't have planned for 2 hours presentation. I'll take only 2 questions because I want to finish at 10 after 6. So questions, comment, I see Yair is raising his hand, and Uri and also Dana. So please, anyone else wants to enter? Please open your screens and start. Shaked and Yevgeny, do you want to go?
Who goes first?
Who goes first? Yes, sure. And we take a few of them together and then give you the ability to answer. Please.
I got two questions. I guess the first is shorter. I wanted to ask you about the definition of artificial intelligence. And besides that, is it secure to increase our reliance on algorithms in terms of vulnerability towards hackers' attacks? Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to be short on this.
Thank you,
First of all, you want to collect more?
Andrea, please. Yes, please, because of the time limits.
Yeah, I collect all the questions, then I'll take notes.
Excellent. Dana?
Yes, thank you, Andrea. It was absolutely fascinating. I would like to ask do you think there's room to put more effort on law systems on account of trying to foresee where technologies go and to make those law systems more, I think that's why you call it agile, like more suitable to changes? Because I think that might be less complex than trying to foresee all the technologies, where they're going, the pace that we have today.
Yeah. Thank you, Dana. And Shaked?
I think I have an answer about the Putin image. So I can wait. I can wait to.
You want to tell us where are you? I don't hear you. I don't know if others can hear you.
Shaked, Dana, speaks.
So he has kind of a guess on the right Putin image. Maybe you can refer to it, Andrea. By the way, we lost you for a minute. Any more comments or questions? One more?
Well, it's not a question. It's just want to ask if there's a possibility to receive the presentation by mail afterwards, because I think it's another way to
David, right? So
thank you. Yeah, it's another way to try to renew our knowledge on the topic.
Yeah. It's yeah. We'll ask Andrea to do it. I will just conclude by the question, maybe provocative, maybe not that provocative. You said not data is the new oil, but trust is the new oil. And for me, maybe it's right to say that regulation is the new oil. Smart regulation is the new oil for a better technological governance or a better society. So that's all, Andrea, just to conclude, you have about 4 minutes.
Okay. I'll start with yours, David, because I think it is ironic, right? That today we're looking at regulation as a source of trust in an environment that was intentionally kept unregulated when it emerged in the first place, right? We left the internet unleashed relatively freely, and obviously it has created a lot of important benefits for society, but it's also gradually shown the need for additional rules and additional governance measures that represent the public interest. Obviously, we have that problem today. We have that problem even in the United States, where most of the large tech platforms in the Western world are located. So it's not even a geopolitical problem anymore. It's actually a regulatory problem in and of itself, even in where the large tech giants are originally headquartered. So what originally had emerged as a discussion of potentially regulation killing innovation, or regulation being putting constraints on an otherwise revolutionary technology is now, I think, becoming convergence towards the need for smart regulation. But I think also in alignment with what most of the academic literature has proven over time, that adequately stringent, well-timed, well-drafted, and relatively flexible regulation is a blessing for innovation, because it aligns innovation with social needs and potential long-term public policy goals. Just to summarize that with a much more mundane statement, we don't need a lot of investment in AI to enable a better selfie or to a better recommendation engine in Netflix. I'd rather put public money and also private money into the development of solutions of AI for good, for example, on AI for the climate. And we will probably see that in the next US administration and in the future global governance of climate. AI will be instrumental to that. Now, going back to the different questions that I have received, is there a definition of AI? Yes, there are like hundreds, right? I am almost embarrassed to say that while I was advising the European Commission with the impact assessment of the forthcoming regulation, towards the end of my work, I was called by the European Commission into an emergency meeting at closed doors, where the people in DG Connect, the European Commission, finally asked me the question, by the way, what kind of definition of AI should we be giving? And some parts of the European Commission wanted to define the AI as machine learning, which in my opinion is unsatisfactory, because the future of AI is not necessarily only machine learning. It can be a combination of expert systems, machine learning, probabilistic programming. You don't only craft rules for one specific type of AI. If you listen to some of the key AI experts in the world, for example, my friend Stuart Russell, he will tell you within 4 or 5 years from now, he expects machine learning to hit a wall, and probabilistic programming will come to the rescue in helping us develop machines and algorithms which use a blend of different techniques in artificial intelligence. So eventually, the high-level expert group on AI of the European Commission has given a relatively technology-neutral definition of artificial intelligence. I think it's relatively reasonable. It was crafted also with the help of key experts in this field. For example, Francesca Rossi was now the president. Not only she works for IBM, but she's also the president of the AAAI, so the highest academic association of AI experts. So that the important thing is that AI is defined in a technology neutral way. It enables differentiation from standard software. So it has to be an element of a relatively sophisticated elaboration of information, but there also needs to be an avoidance of characterizing AI for what we see today, which is largely machine learning or its subvariants. Is it secure to rely on all these algorithms today? I think most experts would tell you that while AI in and of itself as a standalone tool could be made relatively secure, the AI plus Internet of Things emerging business models are unbelievably unsecure, meaning all this, cameras or devices that you put in your house, or the wearables that most people use, especially the cheapest ones that are on the market, they are extremely easy to hack and attack. So key experts, you can look at the social scientists like myself, but also much more. I would trust computer scientists. I don't know, Joanna Bryson from Hertie School, among others. They consider the current evolution of the IoT as creating a much denser, much more complicated attack surface for public policymakers. And this is something that we will have to deal with really as an emergency issue. Is it true that we should make laws more agile and adaptive over time? We might rely on foresight. We might try to forecast at least some of the key trends, but we do need to have maybe expert-led boards or agencies or institutions that continue to elaborate what typically standardization bodies cannot do, what conformity assessment bodies cannot do easily. So some governance mechanism that can more flexibly and regularly update the information and spread regulatory certainty in the market. At the EU level, there is a discussion between a board, which is what the European Commission would want on the lessons learned from GDPR, or an agency as the European Parliament would want to have. But in both cases, I think there is no understanding of the need for agile systems. And the slides that I didn't show you, but you will see are, if you wish, a little bit more projected into the future, because the European Commission still seems to largely rely on ex-ante conformity assessment for systems that largely create their risks and their damages as they learn in the market. So ex-ante, you but basically don't see anything. So and that is one of the key issues that we'll need to solve. And then I don't know what was your take, and as I conclude on the Putin image. I mean, who says that the one on the left was the real one, or maybe you can say yes directly in the participants list. Let me see if some people want to do this.
It was me. If you can go back.
You want me to share the screen again, and as we do this as a sort of...
I can tell you, I think the right is real and the left is fake.
Okay, let me see. I go back or just do it like this. It's probably faster. You should be seeing my screen. And
I think the right is real.
The right is real and the left is fake.
I think the opposite.
Okay, so do you really want me to tell you, or maybe I leave it like this so that...
Both.
No, not sure.
Well, I myself, just to conclude this, I know that we are out of time. I myself had to trust, just to remain in the same topic of today's class, the people that told me that the one on the left is indeed fake. But I have no way myself, because I didn't do it. I cannot inspect the system that generated. So the only thing I can say is don't trust a person that had to trust somebody else to tell you something that might be incorrect. And so perhaps this is the best way in which we can close today's class, by maybe reiterating how difficult it is to trust academics, experts, and anyone who is not given the possibility of observing the process behind the many different things that we see that we can easily confuse between real and fake. So that is...
Nobody has a monopoly on knowledge. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Exactly. And that is implicit in my lesson. Obviously, I could have elaborated a lot more on that side and on many other sides. Happy to come back and continue the conversation because I see you interested, but this is up also in the, and credit that goes to David for bringing together such a good group and choosing this very topical subject for this series of seminars, which is trust.